Hello,
Hi.
welcome everyone to our virtual fireside chat. I'm Kathryn Holt, the CEO of the Greater Victoria Chamber of Commerce, and I'm joined today by the CEO of the Victoria Symphony, Kathryn Laurin. Welcome, Kathryn.
Thanks, Kathryn. Great to be here.
I have invited Kathryn because she leads the organization for the Symphony, which is a fantastic arts organization in town. And I'm putting her in the somewhat awkward position of representing and speaking for other arts organizations, not officially, but just because they've been keeping in touch and she has a sense of how they've all been impacted by our COVID-19 measures. And just before we got on the Facebook Live, I was reminding her of and I was saying that I had attended a wonderful performance called The Naked Classics, Tchaikovsky's Pathétique, and it seems like a decade ago, but it was really only February 2nd of this year when life was completely different for arts organizations and the rest of us. So with that kind of context, I have a number of questions and I invite anybody in the audience to send in their questions. We've already received one that I've incorporated into our discussion today, and you can do that in the comments section on Facebook. So Kathryn, could you paint us a picture, give us an overall description of how the requirements to avoid large gatherings that has been issued by the public officer of health, Bonnie Henry, has affected you and any organization really that requires an audience?
Sure, Kathryn. As I think most people are aware, Dr. Bonnie Henry has issued this restart plan with 4 phases in it, and it's quite clear that large performing arts organizations will fall into the last phase, phase 4 of returning to any sense of normal. And at the moment, any gatherings of 50 people or more are prohibited. So that obviously impacts any performing arts organization where we rely on having a fairly large audience, filling the Royal Theatre or UVic concert hall with over upwards of 1,000 people. It really means that the whole concept of traditional live performance is simply not possible as we've known it up to this point. So that's been explosive in terms of disrupting the way in which we've been delivering our art form.
Absolutely. Give us a sense of how that has impacted. I know it's had a whole bunch of different impacts, just on the ability of the community to enjoy those art performances, the ability of the artist to have the opportunity to perform their art. But just to start out with, give us a sense of how it's impacted your financial picture.
Sure. Well, the Symphony and any other performing arts organization here in Victoria, it's obviously with our inability to present live performances, we lose the opportunity to generate ticket revenue, which accounts for, in our case, almost a quarter or 25% of our operating budget at a minimum, and sometimes more than that. So we lose that huge chunk of revenue that makes it really difficult for us to continue, it impacts our sustainability going forward. And
yeah. So 25% loss of tickets, but and we'll get to other impacts in a minute, but in that scenario, which every arts organization, both locally and just across the whole country, must be experiencing, what have you had any special measures, received any special assistance above and beyond what all businesses have been able to take advantage of? So the wage subsidy, the rent assistance, some loan with some forgivable portion, all very quickly, and I would say very generous programs rolled out very quickly that have been a lifeline. But you're in the category of a few sectors, and I'm going to say tourism is another one of them, that has had an absolute wipeout, an absolute devastation of your ability to do business. So have you received any particular additional assistance?
Yeah, that's a great question. So in the symphony's case, we have a staff on the administrative side, and then we have our orchestra players. Our orchestra players are independent contractors, so they are unfortunately not eligible for the wage subsidy program in its current format. Our staff are eligible, and so we have applied like everybody else, and certainly so far we have qualified. You have to meet certain criteria based on revenue loss and so on. So we've been able to take advantage of that for our staff component. For the musicians, though, they really fall through the cracks. They're not eligible for the wage subsidy. And, there's the CERB piece, which is the $2,000 a month, but that has some pretty strict criteria as well. And that's just opening up on June the 7th. So there's a possibility that some of our musicians may qualify for that and others may not. But I will also add to that certainly at the municipal, provincial, and federal level, most of the larger performing arts organizations, we are able to apply for grants at those various levels. And those grants are based usually on artistic merit. Each one of those organizations has certainly come forward. So these are operating grants. And those three levels have come forward to provide us an advance on our grant for next year. And that was to help primarily with cash flow. And we're getting every indication that even though our plans may change drastically, that the balance of those grants are likely going to come forward in an effort to support the sector and to keep the organization sustainable. And so we're moving away from that artistic merit based kind of allocation to now they're talking about supporting structure. So that's also been very helpful. And then I will also add that the federal government is channeling some further funding. You may have read about a $500 million fund that was going to be made available for sport and culture. And of that 500 million, 55 million of it is coming to our federal granting body, the Canada Council. And they will in turn channel that out. And that's emergency funding. And it'll be based on a percentage of your operating grant. And then we also have an indication through the Canada Council and federal government that down the line, there could be some more funding available because they're developing a three-phased approach. We're in phase 1 right now, but phase 2, they talk about supporting structure. And in phase 3, they talk about rebuilding. So we are hopeful that there could be some more support coming down the pipeline.
Okay, and all of that, as we were saying just before we got on the line, it's hard to know whether to be excited or terrified by how quickly the federal government has stepped up and responded to these circumstances. Because to me, fabulous that they do and that they have, but terrifying that they recognize the extent of the damage and challenge for so many organizations. And when you talk about your audiences not coming back till phase 4, so just to compare that to a number of other types of business that are able now to start reopening. And yes, they've got huge challenges. They might not be able to have as many customers in their store or, provide service the way that they wanted to, but they can try and they are adapting. And so when the current federal funding programs end at the end of the summer, there's a chance that they will not need that lifeline. They can go back to earning enough revenue. But you, as again, I'm going to make the tourism comparison. You're in the same boat. You have nobody. You have no customers for the foreseeable future. So this is a much bigger, longer, and deeper proposition to try to keep arts organizations functioning. Could you talk a little bit about what you have been doing now, though, in this circumstance to reinvent? So if it's going to be a long haul, what are you doing to try to reinvent what you do as a symphony?
Yeah. Well, you know what they say, nothing like a crisis to force you to become creative and innovative. So that's certainly what we're looking at. And again, I think I can speak in general terms on behalf of many of the other performing arts organizations. Now we're forced to look at a different way of maintaining a presence in the community. It's not a question of just turning off the lights for 12 months and saying, well, when there's a vaccine, we'll come back. The rebuilding in that kind of a situation would be devastating. So I think we all want to have a presence within the community during this COVID challenge. And really the only way to do that or the primary way to do it is virtually. So in the case of the symphony, we're now looking at ways in which we can, although we can't have that live concert experience, what can we do virtually? And so we're looking at presenting a sort of a mini series for the season, if you will, whereby, again, we have to follow the provincial health restrictions, getting smaller ensembles together and trying to share that through Facebook and virtually, so that we still have touch points with our patrons. I mean, that's really important. And I know in the case of the opera, they're looking at some opportunities to have smaller musical events happening. And with Dance Victoria, for example, they're focusing, I think, really on they've got dance studios, so they're trying to generate revenue by having those dance studios open and functioning. It's very interesting for the Victoria Symphony, because we know that COVID is transmitted primarily through droplets in the air, or certainly that's one of the strongest forms of transmission. And when you get a symphony orchestra together on a stage, you've got brass players and wind players who, by virtue of just playing their instrument, they are releasing droplets into the air. So now we've got to figure out the science of how do you manage that, and how far apart do those players need to be so that they're not potentially, shedding droplets on other people. So we're now looking at some best practices across the country of building plexiglass screens and having some of the brass players play into those screens, and wind players. So this is all brand new territory for us. And so there's the technical aspect of it, and keeping people's orchestra members safe while they try to play at a distance, which also has its challenges. So it's really, as we dig into it, we're realizing how complex it is, and then the technical piece of actually trying to record and release that and get people on a stage while they're still socially distanced. So there's a lot to think about.
And, my mind was just running through the other organizations that you listed, and all of them operate in a world that assumes some human contact, either proximity or actual physical contact. In the case of Dance Victoria, for example, in the theater often, opera often, maybe you guys aren't actually physically in contact with each other, but right next to each other normally on the stage. So that's people having to reinvent their art form as well as how they deliver it to an audience. That's incredible.
Absolutely. And we know, Kathryn, that the science has demonstrated that singing is one of the most aggressive ways to shed droplets. There were a couple of cases of choirs in the United States, church choirs that got together, and everybody got infected after one choir rehearsal. So, for the opera, for example, when opera singers, they're obviously very close together and singing to each other at close proximity. So it really makes those options completely out the window at this point in time.
So you talked about presence in the community. Is that your main objective then over the next 12 months? Maintain your profile rather than, can't maintain the live audience, maybe tough to maintain your revenue. So really it's just profile that you're aiming for, or do you have other objectives as well?
Yeah, I would say it's multi-pronged, Kathryn. We certainly want to maintain, if you want to say profile or those touch points with community, we want people to be able to still experience symphonic music, albeit virtually, as opposed to having the excitement of being in the concert hall. So, maintaining those touch points with community is obviously very important. We also, though, I will say, along with that, have a tremendous commitment to musicians, because, we employ up to 70 musicians for a concert. And these are people, this is how they earn their livelihood. And, we're trying to look for ways where we can provide employment opportunities for our musicians so that they can remain in the community. Many of these people are teachers at the Conservatory of Music. They teach privately. They're contributing to the artistic life in the community. And we certainly don't want to lose those players. because that really affects the impact and the quality of our orchestra and the whole artistic musical life of this community if those people were to leave and seek work somewhere else. So our board does feel a really strong commitment to the musicians. And I will add to that we had to cancel our season in the middle of March, unfortunately. The 2019-20 season. We were in the middle of a Beethoven festival that was just going gangbusters. And our board did decide to continue to pay wages, 100% of wages for the musicians right up till the end of the season, which was I think they're proud of that decision. And it was a clear demonstration of the value that we place on having these musicians in the community.
Yes, but then again, looking forward, you talk about virtual being a way to maintain your presence, and a couple of things come to mind with regard to that. One, then you're there virtually, and every other orchestra and form of musical and other entertainment is there as well on those platforms and in that mode. So that is pretty daunting competition online. I mean, the thing that you offer here is, the live experience you can't get online. So
right.
My sympathies with trying to compete with, as we were saying earlier, the Berlin Philharmonic.
Yeah.
Not that you're not awesome. Victoria Symphony way above its weight, I have to say, but that's kind of what you're up against. But also you're in the same world that the chamber is, quite frankly, which is you can do a lot of stuff online, but how do you generate any revenue from it?
Yeah, exactly.
So are there any models that you know of? I know there's so many people that will, not-for-profit organizations, charities, arts organizations that have lost their mainstay of charitable fundraising because they can't hold events. Have you seen any models elsewhere in the world that you're going to try out for revenue?
Yeah, I think we're all learning at the same time, right? Because COVID kind of struck everybody simultaneously. And it's interesting, we're looking certainly at what's happening in Europe. I would say Europe is probably a little bit more ahead of what we're doing certainly in Canada. And first of all, they have oftentimes larger concert halls. We're seeing some concerts. There's a concert at the Berlin Philharmonic with 15 players on the stage, and they're all spaced, beautifully on the stage. So there are models that we can look at to see how they're doing it. We've already measured the stage at the Farquhar Auditorium at UVic, where we perform a lot of our concerts. And we've measured to see how many string players we can actually fit on the stage while maintaining the social distance. And we have 21 core string players, and we figured out that actually we can just squeeze 21 on the stage, but nobody else. So yeah, we're looking at what other folks are doing and trying to use that model. You also have to keep in mind too that every jurisdiction has different health regulations, right? I mean, in BC, we know no gatherings of 50 or more until there's a vaccine or herd immunity, or until there's a medication, for COVID. And could that goalpost move? I suppose it could, but that's our reality right now. Whereas, you look at what's happening in the US, every state is different, right? I mean, some of them are almost right back to day-to-day business and others are not. So we look at what's going on, but again, we have to work within the parameters that we have here in BC.
Yeah, very good point. So just to put everything in a bit of a broader context, if we see the loss of all these performances, the benefit in the city, what would you carry that into a loss for community?
So
you turn it the other way around and get a pause. What these arts communities contribute to our city?
So you froze up on me there, Kathryn, just a bit, but I think you asked me what do the what do
virtual? It's fantastic.
Yeah, here's the technology. We can't live with it, can't live without it. I think maybe you asked me about what do the arts contribute to community. Was that the question? Yeah. So let me try to answer that, assuming I don't freeze up. Um, listen, I think all these performing arts organizations, whether it's theater, dance, music, we provide a live, unique experience for the audience where you can step out of your day-to-day world and be transported artistically to experience and be exposed to beauty in a performance, and to take us out of ourselves. I mean, we're human beings, we have souls, we're sensitive. We need those kinds of activities to feed us and to inspire us. And I think, the data will show that some of the most sophisticated societies have extremely well developed communities of arts and culture. And it's an integral part of who we are as human beings. And I think not having that, to be able to experience live performance for an extended period of time is going to be challenging for so many of us, and it's going to force us to rethink how we want to experience art. And for the time being, we'll have to experience it for the most part virtually, which can also be very inspiring. And to your point about there's the competition out there, so everybody's using the same platform, and how can we drive our patrons to come and see our scaled down performances? And I think I would say to our community, never has there been a time when we are now relying so much on our community to continue to support all performing arts organizations in the region as we try to stay relevant and keep these touch points up with our community. And we're not going to generate a lot of revenue through these virtual activities, and we know that. But what would be rewarding for us would be to know that you're going to tune in and watch us and support our musicians, support our artists as we continue to try to create art and share that in a meaningful way.
Yes, well, I'm sure we're all going to feel starved, for sure, as you said, of those things that add so much to human experience. I certainly will. But you also contribute, as well as that level of human engagement and artistic expression, financially and economically to our region in a big way. Can you talk a little bit about what the impact is financially?
Yes, I can, and thank you for asking. Just a small example would be the symphony alone. We will book over 300 hotel rooms in a season. And Pacific Opera Victoria will do the same. So there's 600 hotel rooms that are being used by our guest artists and soloists. But I can speak on behalf really of Dance Victoria, Pacific Opera Victoria, and the Victoria Symphony. Our three organizations together, we have a direct economic impact of over $16 million on the CRD. We generate almost $7 million of direct employment income. And the art sector in Victoria in general generates about $140 million in GDP activity in arts and culture in the region. So it's not insignificant. It drives the economy. We pay salaries to our core musicians, annual salaries. We keep people employed here. And these are all important components of our community.
And support a lot of restaurants, I can say, for those of us who like to have a meal before we have a great performance. Yeah. And in the off season often, so you're doing a lot of your performances, and a lot of your offerings are when the local businesses don't have a lot of tourists that they're relying on. So exactly. That's another way to balance out our somewhat seasonal economy. So I like to ask everyone that I talk to at the end, any silver linings for the arts community, and especially for the Victoria Symphony. This has been a really, really tough time, and it will continue to be a really tough time for you. I don't want to minimize that, but there's been some surprising positive outcomes, unexpected benefits, anything like that for you or the arts community?
Well, I would say two things, Kathryn. I would say, first of all, again, I know I speak on behalf of some of my sister organizations. We've been overwhelmed by the generosity of our patrons as we cancel concerts who are returning their tickets and turning them into donations for tax receipts. So rather than us lose that revenue, they've said, hey, keep the revenue, give us a tax receipt. So that has been a small silver lining, if you will, that we could have lost much more money had our patrons not chosen to do that rather. And I would also say, you know, in a crisis, it really pulls people together. So we've had to work closely with our sister organizations. You and I were chatting earlier about, you know, we're staying in touch with the CEOs of the large arts organizations in town, including the art gallery and the museum and the library, Belfry Theatre, the Conservatory of Music. And we're having conversations that ordinarily we wouldn't have had there not been this crisis. So that part's good, and sharing of information, and there's certainly a willingness of people to come together and work together and be flexible and move beyond our traditional boundaries and parameters, because we are being forced to do things differently, to think differently outside of the traditional way of doing things. So those are always healthy spin-offs out of a situation. You've got to make you have to, you know, play the hand that you're dealt with and aim for a great outcome. And I think that's what everybody's working very hard to do.
Yeah, I think that's a true story across so many different networks in the city. You know, maybe you knew people, but wow, we have all got to know each other very well over the last few months, and in a positive way, you know, really put aside individual agendas and tried to figure out how to help everyone get through this. So absolutely agree with that silver lining. So thank you very much, Kathryn. Just on a closing note, I know there's thousands of people who are going to miss our lovely tradition that was up for its 30th anniversary of the Symphony Splash, one of the absolute incredible innovations and landmark events for the Symphony. So yeah, you know, like so many other things that won't be happening this summer, that's going to be something a lot of people will miss. But hang in there and keep on trying to make our lives better with your beautiful music. And thank you for joining me.
Thanks very much, Kathryn. You take good care.
Yeah, thank you.